our talks. But thanks so much for having me here today. Beth, really thanks for the introduction. And yeah, this work is a part of the work that I've been doing at the center as a part of my Fulbright fellowship. And so it's on fruiting phenology in Nyungwe National Park. And this has been a huge collaborative effort with Beth and Simon Burrow, and I worked a bit workshopping these results with Felix and Prote from African Parks. And so I'm really excited to share what I've got so far and what we are continuing to work on with this. So just as an introduction, phenology is just the study of the timing of life events. So things like flowering, fruiting, leaf production, and maturity. And this timing is something that we know in trees is determined by proximate cues and mechanistic drivers. But what is the difference between those two things, you might ask? Excellent question. A cue is something, a type of climate variation that's tracked by individual plants. So it acts as kind of a trigger for synchronous reproduction within populations. And a driver, a cue could be something like temperature dips, so like a minimum temperature that you see at a certain time throughout the year. It could be a drought followed by a break in the drought, so like the first rain after the dry season. It could be a peak in irradiance or a lengthening or shortening of the photo period, so the amount of daylight there is during a certain time of the year. And then a driver is a limiting resource of plant reproduction. And these are things like sunlight and water that relate more to the ability of the plant to acquire energy and then use that energy to produce leaves or to reproduce, to produce flowers and fruits. And we know that these climate cues and drivers affect trees in certain ways, and so we can use phenology data combined with climate data to identify flower cues. There's a few really nice papers actually that Joe Wright is involved in, but I really like this one. This is Chen et al. Paper from 2018, and that one used a model that looked at the minimum temperature followed by a gap, so they had to estimate the window of days between that minimum temperature and the first drought after rain. And as you can see, the observations, so everything in pink, which is where the flowering period occurred, matches up pretty well with the predictions of the models that they use, which is the black lines on this figure. And so incorporating these multiple different steps of seasonal fluctuations in climate in the model, they were able to really well predict the timing of flowering in this certain tree species. And then for things like sunlight and cloudiness that can affect photosynthesis, we can look at these as drivers of fruiting or flowering patterns. And so if you look on this figure from this paper by Harwood et al. 2023, this red line on the panel on the left represents irradiance, which is a measure of the amount of light that plants can receive. And that matches up really well with the red line representing the amount of flowers or the amount of species that are in flower in that forest at the time. And you can see that sunlight is really related to the number of species that are in flower. And because we know that, climate is so linked to phenology patterns, this is a really important ecological relationship. And because these seasonal patterns in phenology are shaped by seasonal fluctuations in climate, this makes phenology data a really great key indicator of climate change. And climate change is impacting ecosystems worldwide, as we well know, and shifts in the global climate might not only impact trees, but they can also have cascading impacts on other organisms as well. And so when we link up climate data with phenology data and wildlife data, we can use this information to better inform wildlife conservation strategies. For example, you can get information about fruit production, and you can use it in protected area management planning. Now, one paper that I thought did this really well, this linking of climate phenology and wildlife data, was this paper by Bush et al. And this paper focused on phenology data and elephant body condition data from Lope National Park in Gabon. And what they found was this pretty dramatic pattern where when you looked at ripe fruit encounter, they looked at in these blue lines on the graph, the ripe fruit encounter from 1988 to 2018, and they found that there was this decline in all fruit production in the entire community that they observed over that time period. And then even more interestingly, what they found when they focused on the super fleshy, really large fruit that is targeted in elephant diets, that fruit had an even more precipitous decline when they looked at their data. So looking at this red line here on the graph. And they wanted to know whether this decline in fruit production had an impact on elephants over time. And so at this field site, they also had a lot of information from camera traps that captured photos and videos of elephants. And so they have this data set that is overlapping with the period of time that they measured they observed the phenology data for, and they went and they extracted a bunch of photos from the camera trap data that they had, and had experts score the elephant photos based on their body condition. So from really plump and excellent body condition down to very emaciated and a very poor body condition. And what they found was from the period of 2008 until 2018, which is when they had this data from, there was also a significant decline in elephant body condition over that period of time as well. So my question after reading this study was, will we find the same pattern elsewhere and for other wildlife? And so when thinking about how a similar long-term fruit production pattern might play out over time in Nyungwe National Park, I wanted to sort of get a sense of the similarities and differences between the site that they studied for the Gabon study and compare that to the site that I wanted to do my analyses at in Rwanda. And so Lope National Park is a lowland forest savanna mosaic ecosystem in central Gabon. It is between 200 and 600 meters in elevation, and it's mostly flat, but it does have a few hills, and I stress hills because they would barely be hills compared to anything that you would find in Rwanda. But they do have these elephants, which are one of the largest bodied sea dispersers there in Lope National Park. And then in Nyungwe National Park, we have a montane forest in southwest Rwanda. The elevation is from 1765 to almost 3,000 meters. It has very steep slope terrain in the park. And one of the larger bodied sea dispersers here is chimpanzees. So when we think about how forest functioning changes with elevation, we have some information from the scientific literature that we can draw on to form our hypotheses about this. We know that forest functioning can be negatively impacted by climate changes at lower elevation sites. But cooler, higher elevation sites might not see the same impacts simply because trees don't reach their stress thresholds like for drought tolerance or for heat tolerance at those higher elevation sites. And the Rwanda Tree Project, which is another really great project in the center with collaborators from Sweden, has also observed these patterns in Rwanda. There's some great papers from Miriam and some other co-authors, and you can look up more about that on the website. But basically, they found these more dramatic patterns of forest functioning being impacted by climate change in the eastern provinces, which are at lower elevations, than in the western provinces near where Nyungwe is located, which are higher elevations. And so based on this information, we might also expect to see similar patterns when comparing fruiting phenology trends between low and high elevation sites. So Gabon is a very low elevation site. Nyungwe is a very high elevation site. And so when we're comparing them, we might see fewer of those climate stress impacts on the fruit production in Nyungwe National Park. And so I just want to highlight a little bit of the history about the phenology data. This project was started in 1990 by, of course, Beth Kaplan, and it was called Projet Frugivore. And the Wildlife Conservation Society took over the monitoring for this project in 1994. This effort was led by Felix Mulindahabi, which he has continued spearheading this effort since then. And then African Parks has continued this monitoring since 2021. This is me at a meeting with the phenology team and some other people at the park that support the phenology data collection and entry and management. And this phenology project in the beginning was really designed to monitor frugivorous species for primates and bird species. So there's a lot of really interesting wildlife in Nyungwe. I put up pictures of 3 of them, just 3 of ones that I think are very interesting. You have these olive baboons, the black and white colobus, and of course chimpanzees. And a lot of the wildlife that you see in Nyungwe are frugivorous seed dispersers, which means they rely on fruits to make up a large part of their diet, and they consume the fruits and then eat and disperse the seeds. And so for the purposes of this talk today, I'm going to be focusing on the chimpanzees because there's been a lot of research focusing on chimpanzee diet and what fruits they eat and how much of each fruits they eat throughout the years in Nyungwe National Park. And so, yeah, this is from Nicole's paper, so it's really great. So interesting that she's here because I looked at this paper and I used the information that she had studied during her time in Nyungwe to identify some of the most common fruit species in chimp diets, which you can see pictured here. And then I used all of this information to come up with a full list of the chimp fruit species, the fruit species that are targeted in chimp diets at Nyungwe. And so just to recap the phenology data, it's the fruiting data from Nyungwe National Park is what I'm using. So they have data on the timing of flowering and leaf production and things like that, but I haven't really done many analyses with that. And then this data set is from 1996 to 2019. I just got the data through 2021 cleaned up, so it's exciting. We're adding that into the analyses right now, and we're running the models. And there's a total of 66 species in this phenology data set. And then I added the information on fruit species presence in chimp diet and their importance rankings based on a bunch of these papers that Nicole had published and some other papers that have recently come out in the past 5 or so years from Nyungwe. And so for repeat models that the total opposite pattern that they found in Lowland National Park, which is there's this gradual increase in fruit production over time. And I compared the full community of fruiting trees that were observed, so all 66 species represented by this black line here, to all of the fruit that were eaten in chimp diets. So these are pictured in green, and then just the most important fruit in chimp diets, which are pictured in pink. And based on these two panels, you can see that the fruit production is increasing over time in all of these different subsets of the data. Then I looked at changes in seasonal fruiting patterns over time. I did this by comparing the first year of the data, so 1996, with the last year in the data. This was 2018 in the data that I had previously. And so the 1996 data shows this nice fruiting peak in June and July, while 2018 shows a fruiting peak in April. And this is pretty interesting because the data from 1996 shows that there's this peak that is, right smack dab in the middle of the dry season. And that's sort of a really important, period of time because of resource limitation for chimps. But then in more recent years, this suggests that the fruiting peak is much higher in the middle of the wet season, so in April. And so that can have a really big impact on, how chimpanzees or other frugivores in the park are sort of experiencing these ebbs and flows of fruit availability inside of Nyungwe. I did look at the species-specific long-term trends of fruit production over the entire monitoring period as well. All of the black species here are species that are not eaten by chimps, and then the pink one, those top 10 ranked species of chimp fruit in their diets, and then the green ones are the rest of the species that are present in chimp diets but not in that list of top 10. And so just to zoom in on a couple of these here, overall the patterns are that most species have stable fruit production over time, same as that graph at the beginning. But then a few species, so these sort of top 3 species that you can see here, have a big or gradual increase in fruit production over time. So things like Belschmedia schleveni, the probability of encountering ripe fruits increases a lot from 1996 until 2018. And those species that have these increases could be importantly driving the community level patterns that we saw in the first models. Trends for the top most important chimp fruit are based on sort of these 4 species, which I had flashed the pictures of at the beginning. And so you have Ficus Oreodriatum and Ficus sur, and I lumped these together because they're both fig species, and they're really difficult to tell apart when you're looking at like chimp seeds in terms of, or seeds in chimp dung, or the wadges that chimps spit out when they're eating fruit. And so normally those 2 species get sort of lumped together when you're talking about fruit in chimp diet. And both of them have these just very gradual increasing trends over time, which is pretty good news because, you don't see those types of big declines in these key fruit species, like for some of the tree species that they were looking at in Lope. And then, you have Myriontus holstei and Syzygium guineense, which don't show as much of an increase, but they have kind of this stable trend over time, meaning that they're not, producing more and more fruits, but also we don't see those big declines similar to what the researchers saw in Gabon. And there have been some chimp movement and behavior shifts in Nyungwe, and so this is these things are things that Felix and Forte sort of have told me about things that they've observed or the chimp teams have observed at the park. And so chimps are spending more time at higher elevations. They're exiting the park more frequently. And they also appear to be hunting more frequently, which might be the exiting the park and the hunting more frequently might be because of pressure or like perceived pressure that chimpanzees have of a lack of fruit availability. Maybe that's related to the seasonal shift in the fruiting peak that I put up earlier in this presentation. And I haven't done those particular analyses yet, so I have sort of a more general analysis that I have results on right now, and this is based on data that WCS had collected about chimp abundances in the park in 2009, 2014, and 2021. And what those researchers found was that there was no drop or gradual increases in chimp abundances, so also the chimp population over this period of time was relatively stable. So my conclusions from the phenology analyses are that overall there's no big drop in fruit production in Nyungwe National Park. Again, this was the opposite pattern to what was seen in the lowland site in that paper from Gabon. So this is pretty interesting and sort of makes us want to look into a couple of the reasons why we're finding such different patterns at these two different sites, probably related to elevation. Most species do have roughly stable fruit production over time, and a few species have had big increases in their fruit production. Others have had a gradual increase. And then there's no signal of a drop in chimp abundance or an increase in chimp abundance from this very limited data for this very sort of first pass analysis that we were able to do. But then the next steps for these analyses are to obtain the finer scale information on chimp movement and behavior patterns over time, and investigate the variations in fruit production across different elevations in Nyungwe National Park, and also to compare the longer-term fruiting patterns across different sites to better understand some of these climate fruit production links. And I just want to share some of the things that I've been working on. These are not, like results that are done yet, but it did take some time just to find the chimp data and clean it up a bit. But now I do have a bunch of this chimp data. So it has information of like the latitude and longitude of where the chimps were, the altitude that they were at, and the species and the parts of the species that they were eating. So that's really interesting. And we're going to be able to use that to look into, some of these patterns that might be correlated with seasonal shifts in fruit availability. And also I've been doing some digging into some different ways to model the fruit production at different elevations in the park. This was sort of an older model that I was looking on that didn't show a lot of differences, but it involved grouping some of the species together, and the species sort of occur across an elevational gradient. And so I'm working right now on a model that considers each species fruit production individually rather than at sort of like a species mean level. And then this summer, so in July, we hosted the African Phenology Symposium at the ATBC conference, which was in Kigali this year. And so for that, we had 8 speakers who presented phenology data from 4 different countries. This was data from Rwanda, Uganda, Gabon, and Nigeria. And a lot of the researchers in this symposium presented long-term analyses, so similar to the analyses that I've done with some of this data from Nyungwe. And also a lot of researchers were either conducting analyses where they were looking at linking fruiting phenology data to cascading impacts, or they were interested in doing these analyses. And those links came in sort of the themes of two different areas. So looking at resource availability for animals to inform like wildlife management strategies or protected area management strategies, and also for food security for humans, which is related to more of like a sustainable food systems theme. And then something that we discussed at the meeting, which we're really excited to build on, is to build on cross-site analyses that we could do. So this comparison that I'm doing with Lope is like one site and another site, but there are papers. This is a paper from Adamescu et al. And she was looking at patterns of I think synchrony and timing of phenology across these 12 different sites across Africa. And she found some really interesting patterns, but it would be great to follow up on this. There's been a lot more data collected since that study came out, so we could clean that up, incorporate that in there, and then probably look at some long-term patterns and maybe try to tease apart the drivers of different long-term patterns like fruiting declines versus gradual increases or stable fruit production that might be occurring across these different sites. So that's it for me today. Thank you. And I wanted to thank all the people who helped support this research. And here is a QR code for a phenology review that I wrote that came out, I think in December 2023. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, I would be very pleased to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was really so interesting, and I really like how you presented it by giving kind of the background of what is phenology and why is it important, and the relationship with other long-term studies. So yeah, fantastic. I'd like to invite anybody who has any questions or comments to you can unmute and ask directly or put it in the chat. Okay, yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
Hello again. That was great, Megan. Yeah, really interesting. And I love the comparison too and difference you found in Nyungwe from the Lope work, and really, intriguing, right? So one of the things I'm curious if you've, I'm sure you have thought about this, but kind of what are the implications for protected area managers? Like, how do you see this work kind of playing into that?
Yeah, so one of the things that they're following up on in Lope is they sort of, found this in one site and they were really, really concerned. And so they started looking at other sites they had data from to see if they don't have like the same, really nice long-term phenology data from those sites, but they do have, there's a lot of people who have done these like camera trap studies over time. And so they did look at the body condition of elephants over time across many different sites. And actually what they found is, I think this is like a more preliminary thing, so they're still working on this, but Lope is actually one of the worst sites in the country for the elephant body decline pattern. And so that, there's an implication there that like, there's something about Lope where it's, the decline is really dramatic there for some reason, and the elephants are being really impacted there for some reason. But across, that pattern's not occurring across all of the protected areas in Gabon. And so that sort of, I think, can inform where you need to place resources and things like that, or where you need to like worry a little bit more about the elephants in terms of, protected area management. Also, they're doing some follow-up studies on what elephants are eating, like, if the fruit isn't available, are they switching to eat something else or something like that? Or are they, like what's happening with the elephants? And I think just knowing those things, if you go too far into this direction, you're not going to probably start to like supplement elephant diets and like, it kind of turns into like a zoo type of situation rather than like a, natural protected area. But, knowing about, what types of foods elephants are switching their diet to might help predict, where human wildlife conflict might be more prevalent or something like that. If they're turning towards crop raiding versus if they're turning towards, spending more time in the grasslands and like eating more grass and stuff like that. And then I think in Nyungwe, what some of the people have been talking about, like when I went to this meeting in August with the team, they were sort of talking about for tourism, they would love to know a bit more, in certain times of the year, which trees could they be targeting to, which trees are the chimps targeting? And so then where could they sort of like plan more tourism activities where tourists would be more likely to see chimps or larger groups of chimps, because since chimp food is so limited in the dry season, usually tourist groups, they might have more of a chance to see like one or two chimps or like a really small group of chimps. And so increasing like the satisfaction of tourists from their tourism experiences in the park is something that management might be able to use some of this information for. And those are just, a couple of things, but this is for me why it's so important to like do the things where you go to the park and present this information to managers, because unless I go and talk to people who are actually working there and ask these questions, I can come up with a bunch of like hand wavy stuff that is maybe not actually relevant for or interesting to managers. But I always gain so many insights when I go in person and have these discussions. So that was a really great opportunity to meet with the team that I had.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, Emmanuel. He had a question about the Lope elevation compared to Nyungwe's elevation and the relationship. I didn't quite get the last part of that question. It's in the chat with elephants and primates. Definitely he's asking about the elevation gradient in Lope compared to the elevation gradient in Nyungwe. And Emmanuel, if you're able to unmute, you can ask your question directly if you want. Otherwise, you can go ahead and try to answer that, Megan.
Okay, is Emmanuel still here?
Yeah, he's there.
Well, I'll just start with the elevation part, I think. Because for Lope, they have 200 to 600 meters in elevation. And then in Nyungwe, it's like 1,700 to 3,000 meters. So it is quite different in terms of the elevations. And that's why doing some of those cross-site analyses would be really interesting and would allow us to look at differences, because you would have sort of more variation in maybe the elevation or maybe some of those climate variables across all of those different sites. You could look at the patterns of long-term fruit production trends over time and try to relate those to some of the climate patterns that you see also at those sites and see, maybe rainfall explains a lot of the variation in fruit production patterns at these sites, or maybe it's something like sunlight, or maybe it's maximum temperature, minimum temperature, or something like that. yeah, but since we don't have that information right now, we're sort of limited in our ability to do those types of comparative analyses. But I am putting together a working group application with some of the people from the African Phenology Symposium, and I need to get in contact with some other people from these other sites that I haven't been in touch with yet. But I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get together at least all the folks from the sites that were included in the Adamescu paper and do some of these types of analyses, because they were able to look at just the phenology patterns, but looking at, connecting the climate data with the phenology patterns over time would also be really interesting. And I see Thierry has a hand raised, so yes.
So thank you, Megan, for your amazing presentation. So, but during your presentation, you have said that there is a gradual increase in fruit production over time. And I want to know the reason behind whether it is the conservation effort that is being put in there or there is any other reason. Thank you.
So I haven't done analyses that link the climate data to the fruit production trends, but since it's a gradual increase, I would suspect that it's something related to those climate drivers. So something that increases the amount of energy that the plants are able to obtain over the years so that they have more energy and more resources to dedicate to reproduction. And one thing that I think could be is that there's more sunlight. And I don't know if that would be because as, the forest is warming over time, maybe there's more sunshine, or, in Rwanda this past year, I know that there's been a lot less rain, maybe less clouds. The wet and dry seasons are sort of not as regular and predictable as they used to be. And so, that's something that we would really have to look into and test. But I think looking at some of those drivers, looking at those things that increase the amount of resources that plants have to make more fruit with would be the first thing to go after there. Because if you're thinking about declines, you would probably be thinking about which of those flowering cues are getting sort of messed up. So I think one of the things from the Lope study that they wanted to look into was if a lot of those trees have a minimum temperature that they need to experience in order for flowering to cue. And if warming causes that minimum temperature not to occur anymore throughout the period of the year, then those trees are going to miss flowering in the seasons or years that they don't get that flower cue. So I think that's why it's sort of important to make this distinctions between cues and drivers, because there's different types of things that can explain these different patterns. I see a question from Jeanette. It says, hello, Megan. Many thanks for this quite interesting presentation, research work. I have just one curious question. There's somewhere you said that chimps spend most of their time at higher elevations. Is this due to food availability or is there any other factor? Thanks. So this is something that I really want to look at with the chimpanzee movement data that I just got. And like I said, that took a little while just because the data was in a couple of different places, and we had to go through it and sort of check it for consistency and things like that. But now that we have it, we do have information on sort of the GPS locations of where the chimp groups are at different times of each day, many days a month across many years. And so we can look and see if the locations that they're in are overlapping with the locations where fruit is increasing most, or if they're just spending time at higher locations generally. which might indicate that they're in higher locations because there's some other type of resource there that they're interested in. Maybe there's more water, or maybe it's just cooler and they're more comfortable at those higher elevations for that reason or some other reason. But yeah, this is something that, yeah, I'm really excited to follow up on now that we've gotten those data.
Cool. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, yeah, I really want to thank you again, Megan. Of course, I always love hearing about this research and always have so many questions also, but that we can talk about that separately. And I really thank everyone for taking the time to come here as well. And yeah, I hope that you all keep your eye out for the next center weekly seminar. I don't know if it's going to be next week or not. Vana is the one organizing those. But if you want to give a talk, you're welcome, and you can contact Vana and get on the schedule. So thanks again, Megan. And yeah, we hope to see more of that great phenology work. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Or wants to be involved or talk about it or you're interested in doing a project on it, please let me know, because I would love to, yeah, just like engage with more people about this data. There's so much data and there's so much you could do with it. So yeah, you could have 17 PhD projects from this. So yeah.
That's great. That's so great. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you again. And yeah, Megan's around, so contact her. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
zibaza vena